Well, thank you for joining our ESRC Center for Society and Mental Health Primers and Provocations event today. Hanna Kienzler is Professor of Global Health in the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine and co-director of the ESRC Center for Society and Mental Health at King's College London. She investigates how systemic violence, ethnic conflict, and complex emergencies intersect with health and mental health outcomes in the occupied Palestinian territory, Kosovo, and among refugees in the UK. She is also co-founder of the Refugee Mental Health in Place Network. Methodologically, her work combines ethnography with a range of other qualitative methods, participatory action approaches, and arts-based techniques. And now I will hand over to Hanna for the presentation.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Ria. I will be sharing my screen now. Just bear with me for a moment. And of course, I want to say thank you for joining me in this presentation. It is wonderful to be able to share my work here. So really grateful for this. So Get to Know Us, Our Lives with Mental Illness in the Palestinian Community, formed a part of a wider Wellcome-funded project called Mental Health and Justice. And this was a multidisciplinary research collaboration that addressed public policy challenges that arise at the interface where mental health and mental health care interact with principles of human rights in the context of war and peace. And as part of this project, I co-led a work stream on community participation and inclusion with researchers, practitioners, and people with lived experience in Palestine and the West Bank. Together, we conducted an ethnographic and participatory action research, which culminated, among other things, in a fully co-produced illustrated storybook entitled Get to Know Us, Our Lives with Mental Illness in the Palestinian Community. And in this talk, sort of 30 to 35 minutes, I want to talk about the project and give you in-depth insight into the development, benefits, and also challenges that go along with a project like this. What I want to do is to share insights into community inclusion and participation with people with severe mental illness in Palestine. I want to explain the process of co-producing the book and how it came about, so our way of working. I want to also highlight challenges, ethical and practical challenges, but also opportunities in that space, and then think about possibly and hopefully with you how the book could be used as part of your teaching, your training, awareness raising, or just otherwise in terms of dissemination initiatives. And at the end, as Ria was already saying, we will have time for questions and answers and reflections on what you're hearing. So, but let me begin with introducing the team, sort of who we are in this process, in this project. So the research brought together expertise of 10 persons with lived experience with severe mental illness, researchers from Birzeit University, so Suzan Mitwalli and Dr. Yoke Rabaia, and then from King's College, that would be me, and practitioners from the Palestinian Counseling Center. Those among us with lived experience of severe mental illness have decided to call themselves Group of Friends with Mental Illness. Real names were unfortunately not an option due to the pervasive stigma and discrimination against those with severe mental illness in the community. As such, the group of friends with mental illness, they had met already regularly, weekly in the rehabilitation center that was run or is run by the Palestinian Counseling Center. The group consisted of 3 women and 7 men. They had quite a wide age range between their mid sort of 20s until the early 70s. And all of them suffered from diverse mental illnesses, often various ones, also at the same time. especially because severe mental illness in the context of the occupied Palestinian territory may also overlap with trauma-related mental health issues. However, diagnoses as such were not really important to us. This is not how we related with one another. That's also why I will not go into this in further depth here. Together, we aimed to understand community integration and participation of persons with severe mental illness in Palestine through ethnographic and participatory action research. And as I said before, one of our flagship outputs was a co-produced illustrated storybook. And the opening words of the book I want to read here and then also begin to present sort of a few sort of key findings, selected findings that are presented in the book. So before going into how we worked on the book in order to show what such co-production also enables. So these are the opening words of the group of friends with mental illness. They say, in the community, we are called crazy. We want you to know that we aren't. We're mentally ill, but not crazy. This book is an invitation for you to get to know us and to bust your negative attitudes towards mental illness. This is needed because the existing fear and false ideas around mental illness lead to unjust exclusion and discrimination of people like us in our society. So to give you a bit of a sense of what we have sort of researched together in this space, we, as the opening statement already said, we explored what living and participating in the Palestinian community means to those with lived experience, with a focus on the notion of community, what community means itself. We didn't take that sort of for granted. Life with mental illness, equity, spare time, the rights to medication and work, and other topics. So let me provide you with some insights that we gained in that space. So first of all, as I said, we thought quite in depth about what community means together as a team. We realized that community is something that is really quite complex. It is a complex idea that consists of various components of institutions, activities, values, histories, and culture. The group had positive and negative experiences and thoughts when exploring the notion of community. Positively, they said that it brings people together through socializing, providing mutual help and support by being politically active, etc. So these were positive feelings towards community or sort of functions of community. But everyone in the group thought that community was also really difficult to navigate when experiencing mental illness. And group members sometimes experienced it as unjust. They experienced it as controlling, of oppressive, of intolerant. And most participants described having been mocked and ridiculed, having been called majnoon, crazy, when walking through the streets. One member is quoted in the book saying, "We are not well integrated in the community. This makes us feel uncomfortable, and we keep thinking, why are we not like them? We can be like other people, but they don't allow us." Community inclusion and participation was also made very difficult, hard at times, due to the illegal Israeli military occupation and related violence, and that not only affected negatively the community inclusion, but also ways in which people experienced their mental health. All group members were, of course, regularly exposed to the general violence of the military occupation, which included movement restrictions due to checkpoints and closures of their villages, the raiding of their homes and their villages, being shot at, injury, imprisonment, and torture. Some of the group members who had experienced imprisonment and torture also traced the beginning of their illness back to the experience to this experience. In the book, they write and state that this has left us physically and mentally scarred for life. They also describe how the military occupation reduced their radius of social interaction and community participation further because it just was unsafe, and people avoided places and spaces where they felt that they could erupt in violence, or where they could have negative experience with the soldiers. And the villages that we worked in and that people came from, they were also particularly affected by settler violence, but also the raiding by Israeli soldiers, and that was on a regular basis. This was not an exception. In this, family played often a crucial role when it came to trying to shield their family members from encounters with the Israeli military. And indeed, family itself, the family home, was a primary communal space for many. So it was hyper-localized, if you think about community, where people with mental illness could participate while also receiving some form of care and support. But also here, community, and something that I always say is community or family itself is not good for you per se. It can be good for you if it is a safe and a good space, but we all know that families come in various shapes and forms with their own problems. So the extent to which people also felt involved in family activities often depended on various factors. This included the severity of the illness itself, family attitudes towards mental illness and stigma, gender, age, the nature of the occasion that someone might have been included or excluded from. Some felt that they could easily participate in family events, they would be invited, while others stated that their families often failed to invite them to community events, be it a wedding, be it a funeral, be it something else, out of shame and worry that people in these spaces would ridicule them. One of the women in the book is quoted saying, "I don't like it when I'm left at home to watch television when my family goes to a wedding. I like to go out too. I like to talk to people, and I like it when people ask me questions." So for her, being involved and included was really important, but oftentimes she was not included, but like she says, left at home with the door locked. Social life outside the home was mainly in the neighborhood, and depending on the illness condition, the economic status, men could frequent local cafes, the mosque, the markets, where they could meet friends and socialize, while women's social life tended to be much more confined to neighbors or family members. Most participants also complained that their friendship networks had severely decreased since the onset of their mental illness, because people who they were previously connected with could not really make sense of their health condition or felt ashamed to be seen in public with someone who was widely considered to be majnoon or crazy. Particularly painful was the experience of being considered unemployable, even though employment was felt to be crucial for people's well-being and their social standing, also their standing in their families, where they felt like they could contribute something to family life, to the family economy. One of the men is quoted in the book saying, "People who have schizophrenia like me can hear voices, and I still hear them. But when I talk, I don't hear voices. When I'm alone, then I hear them. Work and medication ease these voices, but work makes them actually go away." Yet finding paid work was hugely challenging due to various forms of discrimination, including being refused employment if they disclosed their mental illness, being dismissed from work when they experienced a relapse, and then distrust and also hostility from co-workers. To be able to function in society, group members emphasized the importance of medication in the book. Yet taking medication itself was considered not easy, mainly due to the medication's side effects, which impacted on their ability to commit to work duties, social interaction, communication, etc. So one of them wrote, for example, besides making us feel good, it can also make us feel tired, dizzy, less able to move, and can make us gain weight. At the same time, medication is actually not readily available in the occupied Palestinian territory because its import is controlled by Israel. And so it's not always available in the Ministry of Health clinics where people could access it for free. Instead, people are then forced to pay for it out of pocket at the pharmacies. The situation can become even worse when the medication is not even available in the pharmacies. And this is then when people have to go without medication, sometimes for months on end. And there's no other real support for these families available. I mean, there are some organizations, but they're few and far between. So it's really up to the families to sort of support the person, but also deal with the challenges that come with severe mental illness. Yes, with very limited support and almost no professional support during these very difficult times. One of the men in the book said, when I don't get the medication, sometimes I end up destroying things or I become aggressive with my family. I warn people to stay away from me when I cannot find the medication. I need to be able to take my medication. When I don't find it, I'm very worried. And when I have the medication, I'm fine. I can work and I can earn money. To have the opportunity then to participate, let's say medication is available, people are feeling that they can participate in the community, that in itself, again, required for people to be treated equitably. And this, our community members, participant right, involves creating spaces where they can feel safe, respected, and also valued. That was hugely important. With irony, they said, we know that we can't be pilots or CEOs of big companies, but this doesn't mean that we can't work or contribute to community life. All agreed that they required equitable access to education, equitable access to work and healthcare, and receive support to be part of the community. So they didn't feel like it was enough to just be provided with access to these spheres of life. But access was only meaningful if they were actually supported in accessing them. And in this, they said the importance that actually the limitations and whatever limits their ability through their illness needs to be taken into account. So the mental illness cannot simply be cast aside as though it didn't matter. It did matter greatly to them. And open discourse in the community about what it means to be part of the community with a mental illness. That was really something that they wished for, but that didn't happen. So this is just sort of a snapshot about what we are discussing in the book, and then also publications that we have been producing. But now I want to go into our way of working because it is a primer and provocation session. So it's actually about the sort of methodology that we used to explore these community experiences. To produce the book, we worked in over three consecutive years and over 3 phases. And in each year, we conducted a series of between 10 and 12 meetings with a group of people with lived experience, our co-researchers. The meetings had a set routine, starting with attendance taking, developing a plan for the day, some physical exercise, group work on the research theme of the day, cooking, and a shared meal, and then the decision and planning of what to do in the following week. And this sort of rhythm was tried and tested by the group. That's something that they actually did also when we were not there, except for the research component, of course. So we also fit ourselves into this routine, and it really worked well for the project. Maybe also, no, not maybe, it is really important to state that the group of friends with mental illness, they worked as co-researchers and they were also paid for their work. And this was something quite new in research in the Palestinian territory. So, and also here it was really well embraced and was important. So let me tell you a little bit about the first phase of this research. This consisted of weekly meetings over 3 months at the Palestinian Counseling Center to research different aspects of what living and participating in community means. And at the end of each session, the topic and method of discovery was decided for the next week. To unlock the stories and insights, we worked very creatively, as you can also see here in the photos. We always had pens, papers, post-its, watercolors, recorders, cameras to hand as we were exploring these different questions. In this, we visualized our feelings through collages, images, color schemes, drawings, photography, etc. Here you can see some of the work that we produced as we interviewed each other, filled out charts, compared experiences, went on community walks to explore and reflect the surroundings together. And I will talk a bit about that when I think through the challenges and ethical issues that we encountered in this. Following these 3 months, our researchers summarized, or us researchers, we summarized the findings by bringing them into the shape of book chapters. We were lucky to find the famous artist, Amer Shomali, willing to draw the illustrations based in a style that the group had decided. The style was to be realistic and not cartoon-like. It was really important for the participants that the readers will realize that these are real stories, that these are real experiences and not some fantasy or cartoon-like story that they were telling. So that was really important. At the same time, yeah, some of them, they will recognize themselves in these drawings, but they're abstract enough that people will not recognize who they are. The second phase then of the project consisted of another round of weekly meetings over 3 months, during which we discussed, rewrote, revised, redrew the book content. So everything that we had put together was just a draft, and that included not only the text, but also the drawings. Everything changed hugely in that process. Every week we worked through one chapter together, discussing the sentences and meanings, finding out whether what was written actually resonated with people and their everyday experiences. This was really hard work, especially for those who were severely cognitively impaired or had a hard time concentrating. So it requires a lot of patience from everyone in this process. And we moved through the pages, sentence by sentence, summarizing it back to one another, exploring whether it made sense to us, etc. And it was really nice to see how group members also themselves provided each other with support in this process to keep sort of frustrations at bay. But it also made for very slow working, but very concentrated working. But because it was such focused work, at some point, members of the group of friends with mental illness voiced their desire to actually start disseminating initial findings and advocating for their rights. And we were, of course, game for that immediately, thought this was a great idea, and decided together as a group to create advocacy cards spelling out rights and demands for community inclusion and participation on an equal basis with others. So these were then sort of rights that stated the right for not being stared at in the community, the right to be included, the right to work, and framed and articulated in their own voices. So these cards were very nice. They had these quotes that spelled out the rights in their own words that they felt they had. They didn't need to latch on some humanitarian sort of rights-based approaches. And each card had its own sort of photograph on which these quotes were copied on. And then we disseminated these cards in public spaces such as bakeries, pharmacies, cafes, schools, etc., bus stations. And then importantly, we also gave presentations together at the Open University to a full lecture hall of students. We also presented at the local library. Together, we organized meetings with experts such as the director of the mental health unit in the Ministry of Health, psychiatrists, and social workers. And this kind of labor did not come easy, considering that members had to expose themselves to spaces where they often felt extremely stigmatized, mistreated, and excluded. It came therefore also to them as a pleasant surprise when they were welcomed warmly, although they of course also recognized that the presence of us researchers really made a difference in this. So they also looked at this critically and with caution. This brings me to speak about the third phase of our work, which included fewer meetings and was focused on finalizing the book and exposing it to the real world via focus group discussions, which we co-designed and carried out together. We invited mental health practitioners, activists, students to explore and discuss the book. We also invited them to make recommendations for changes and brainstorm how the book like this could be a resource for them. And they did make recommendations for changes that we as a group really liked. And we were still at this point where we could integrate those changes as well. So that was quite nice. And as such, through joint reflection, we further improved the book and finally started to print the final Arabic and English versions of the book. So it's available in both languages. A real highlight came then in 2024. So impact always takes a long time and continues to take place. So the real highlight was when MSF, so Médecins Sans Frontières, contacted us asking whether they could use our book as part of their mental health support and training for MSF staff. So not for other people who they served, but for their own staff in the MSF center. Because they found out that for MSF workers, it was often very difficult to talk about mental illness because of the stigma. And the stories that our friends with mental illness shared in this book really resonated with them. And so it was really special for us to see this. And it had never sort of occurred to us that this group of people with severe mental illness in Palestine would end up producing something that was of value to these Western humanitarian aid workers and providers in that sense. That had somehow not occurred to us. So it was very special to see this used in their own workshops to support their own mental health. This brings me now to the almost last segment of the talk, and where I want to reflect on the ethical and practical challenges that we faced during the work of this project. So this project and the book has been a labor of love for many years. And to get it right, we moved really slowly, making sure everyone was on board and could have their voice heard and make an impact. Such slow working was both joyful, but it was also challenging and sometimes frustrating. The group of friends with mental illness appreciated it, and at the same time, they couldn't wait until they could hold the book in their hands. So sometimes it also felt too slow. Similarly, the artist, Amer Shomali, had to really adapt to a new way of iterative working that was way slower than what he was used to. At some point, he told us, "When I started to work with you, my daughter was just born. When I finished the project, she started going to school." So he thought that was quite funny, but also, yes, shows some of the frustrations that comes with this kind of working. But this kind of slow working was not just a practical requirement. It was also for us an ethical imperative. Ethics we do not understand as a tick box exercise before starting the project. Of course, we had to receive ethical approval from Birzeit University in Palestine and King's College London to carry out such research that was deemed or considered high risk. It was considered high risk because it involved people with severe mental illness who often face stigma and discrimination in society everywhere in the world, and who are considered less able to give informed consent to participate in a project. In our project, the people with lived experience were hired as researchers rather than just participants or informants, and the latter point was really a sticking point, not only for the ethics boards, but also for the Palestinian Counseling Center and the families. So questions that we had to grapple with was, what does it mean to co-produce research, co-own the data and publish together? What risks does such work expose people to? What would happen if their real names were made public? What would there be? What would the social repercussions be, like ridicule or even violence, and how we would deal with that? Legally, we were required not only to receive informed consent from the group members, they were actually asked to assent, but also their families. And we felt really uncomfortable with this with this assenting process, because we believe that our soon-to-be colleagues should make their decisions more autonomously with support from others, rather than just assenting whether to be included or not. But there was no way around it. It was very clear that we just couldn't get our way here. And to ensure that everyone involved was actually comfortable with participation, we practiced consenting as a process. During meetings, every meeting, we checked in whether people were still happy to be part of it, repeated the purpose of our joint work regularly, and we made sure that those who wanted to take a break could take it without feeling excluded from the process of co-production. We also made sure that we would take all decisions together, but followed the lead of those with lived experience. And when it came to questions, though, of authorship, none felt comfortable having their real names on the cover of the book. And this was despite the work that we had been doing in the community. They decided as a group to come up with a group name and requested pseudonyms in the book. Similarly, our community walks remained very close to the rehabilitation center due to safety concerns by the group members themselves. These were not safety concerns by us researchers. They wanted to have a nice time rather than being exposed to stares and nasty commentary when we walked. So we walked along the outskirts and reflected about community, sometimes a bit from the margins, but that I think is also telling. It was therefore a huge step when members decided to expose themselves and their experiences fully to university students, people at the library, and experts at events, especially in settings where they are usually not welcome, and they knew that. And during such meetings, it was very important for us that we didn't curate them as such, but that people could interact in their own terms, deciding on the spot, for example, to go on stage and tell their story, rather than sort of following a script. And that, I think, made it also more authentic and powerful. And they really enjoyed that as well. Practical challenges that we faced were, of course, not only related to community stigma, but the mental illness itself. As mental illness fluctuates, so did the ability of our co-researchers to participate in the book. And sometimes people did have to take a break, but they were always welcome to join back in and sort of be brought back into the fold once they felt they could participate again. In the book, they reflected on these challenges, especially also related to communication, one of them saying, "It is important to admit that communication does not come easy to many of us. For those of us with speech problems, it is difficult to articulate words, while others will be more introverted or at least less able to make sense of what other people are saying and doing." This, however, meant in no way that people could not contribute to the project. On the contrary, we had to make sure that the contribution was possible based on these fluctuating abilities. So we were very alert to what was going on in people's lives, and not only met them at the community center, but we often visited them at home and their families. So we had a much more sort of holistic understanding of their lives. So this is pretty much my final slide. Now that the book is published, we have it as a hard copy, but also online as PDF. And I think you already have the link in the chat, and we can reshare that link as well. You can go on the website. It is available freely to download or to scroll through on the website in Arabic and in English. It has also audio recordings of each of the chapters, but only in Arabic, so that might not be accessible to many of this audience. And there is a section where you can also engage, asking questions related to the book or making comments to the book. So please feel free to engage and share your reflections on the website as well. So we would really love you to read the book, to share the website, to use the book in your teaching and training, or if you're not in these spaces of teaching and training, just share it with other people who you know who might enjoy reading about the group of friends with mental illness and their experiences in the community. So, and with this, I say thank you, and I will be looking forward to questions and your reflections.